Lesson 12 of the Writer's Stage, Patterns of Persuasion. In Lesson 11, we learned about 4 virtues and 3 appeals. Now we'll learn about 2 different ways of organizing your essay, 2 patterns of persuasion. The first is the classical pattern. This pattern is based on the 7 traditional parts of an oration, dating back to, you guessed it, the ancient Greeks. The first part is the introduction. The introduction attempts to win the attention of the audience and create interest in the subject. Personally, I feel that gaining the audience's attention is essential in any type of essay, not just a persuasive one, but it's especially important in this classical pattern. Second is background. Background is offered explaining how the current situation came to exist. You want the reader to have a full understanding of the circumstances which have led to the proposal. In addition to the background information is Part 3, Definitions. Definitions are given for any concept or term which requires greater understanding on the part of your audience. The fourth point is the proposition, where you state clearly what's to be proposed or proven by the essay. This is the heart of the persuasive essay. Following your proposition, you must offer your proof, developing the arguments necessary to justify your proposition. In this section, you will present carefully selected details or examples and logical arguments that support your position. Traditionally, Part 6, the Refutation, anticipates the opposition's arguments to the proof. A good refutation must attempt to respond to the best points of criticism. Many find anticipating the opposition's arguments and responding to them as legitimate complaints difficult, but putting yourself in the naysayer's position helps the reader to see that you're trying to acknowledge their views while also having an answer to them. If handled fairly, the refutation is especially valuable in showing your ethos or ethical appeal, remember Honest Abe, and showing that you have honest respect for the opposing views. Such respect may win you as much support as the logic of your proposition. And then finally, the conclusion reaffirms your proposal and calls the audience to action. Certainly these 7 parts are not intended to be paragraphs. For example, the proof and the refutation would almost certainly require several paragraphs to be effective. Conversely, at times the background and the definition sections might be combined if it makes more sense to your proposal. Let's take a look at how this pattern might apply to the student essay that I mentioned in Lesson 11. If you recall, a student of mine wrote a community proposal which called for upgrading the park in her neighborhood in Lawrence. Keep in mind her audience would be citizens of Lawrence. Therefore, in her introduction, she might choose to describe how much she loves the city. After this description, she might end with a but and state her dissatisfaction with the park in particular. In her background section, she would describe the park, the frequency with which she visits the park with her children, and some of the problems that she's witnessed over time. In the definitions section, she might define the city's responsibilities to its citizens and taxpayers. Or maybe she might define what she considers as a neighborhood, a place where children can play safely, where neighbors come together for common shared activities, etc. Then she'll move into her proposal. She is proposing several very specific things: new equipment for the playground area, crosswalks to get over to the park because she lives on a busy street, better lighting, and converting the large field that goes unused into bike paths and a community garden. Her proof would come in multiple sections. She would give evidence of the dangers that children crossing the busy streets have to face in trying to get to the park, the hazards of the current park equipment that have not been maintained. She'll give examples of another park that she visited on the other side of Lawrence and argue logically that there should not be such a difference in 2 parks in the same city. Finally, she might research community gardens or bike paths and provide statistics of the benefits of these amenities. You'll notice that that last section ties nicely into the requirement of having 2 paraphrases from one source. If perhaps she found a source on community gardens, she might give a few statistics in paraphrase as support for her proposal. In the refutation section, She will anticipate objections to her proposal. More than likely, there will be monetary difficulties as the most prominent objection. Any objection that she would list in this section, she would have an answer for. She would argue her own viewpoint as well. And then finally, she would call her Lawrence citizens to action and perhaps have them support her at the next City Council meeting. The classical pattern of persuasion is often somewhat abbreviated in the modern version, but the relation between the two patterns will be quickly apparent as we go through them. The modern pattern can be summarized in this way. In the introduction, you'll direct the attention of the audience to the problem which needs attention and state your proposed solution. It's important that you state the proposal clearly. Notice this is quite different from the classical pattern. Here you're starting with the problems, and then you're very briefly talking about your proposed solution. You're not going into detail though. That would be your thesis statement at the end of your introduction. Next, you're stating opposing viewpoints, describing honestly why your proposal might be opposed. By fairly presenting opposing views, you show that you understand them. But you don't respond to them in this section. You wait until you get to the proof section. Here, you'll respond to the opposing viewpoints by defining your position and explaining why it's preferable to the opposing viewpoints. Of course, your conclusion reaffirms the position and calls the audience to action. So in the student proposal, she would introduce her essay by starting with the problems in the park, and her thesis at the end of that introductory section would be that the park needs updating. She would then present any objections to changes in the park. In the third section, she would answer those objections with the parts of her proposal, including the support for each element of the proposal. You can see how this section would be the heart of her essay. And then finally, she would call the citizens of Lawrence to action to support her proposal. Just as in each part of the classical pattern might require several paragraphs, so might each part of this pattern, especially the presentation of opposing views and your proof. There are some commonalities between both patterns, however. Both have an introduction and a conclusion. And obviously that's any time you write an essay, you would have an introduction and a conclusion. Both take objections into consideration and answer those objections. Both provide evidence as support. And both use the three appeals, ethos, pathos, and logos, in a variety of ways. And just as a final thought, make sure that multiple paragraphs are used wherever needed. How many paragraphs your essay will have will depend on the topic and how much you have to say and the detail and support that you have. And organize the proof logically or by order of importance, or perhaps both would be the case. It seems that in the student essay, the overriding concern was the safety of the park. She talked about the crosswalks and she talked about the equipment, and both were safety concerns. She would probably want to emphasize those aspects by mentioning those two last in her section on proposals. To better understand these patterns of organization and to see how they make use of the three appeals of argumentation, the ethical, the emotional, and logical, ethos, pathos, and logos, read the two essays starting on page 76 of the textbook. Senator Jack Danforth's essay is an example of the classical pattern, and Steve Muller's Newsweek article is an example of the modern pattern. As you read, look for the patterns as well as the appeals that they've used.